After the 1552 schism in the Church of the East, the Nestorian and Chaldean sections of the Church each had, by the end of the 19th century, around 12 dioceses each. Background: in 1552 a section of the Church of the East rebelled against the Patriarch Shimon Yhb and elected a rival patriarch, Yohanan Sulaka. The rebellion created a permanent schism in the Church of the East. Dioceses of the Church of the East 1552 to 1681. The hierarchy of Yohanan Sulaka. The Vatican was told that the prime movers in the rebellion in 1552 against the Patriarch Shimon Yhb were unnamed bishops of Erbil, Salmis and Adarbegan, who were supported by many priests and monks from Baghdad, Kirkuk, Gazata, Nisibis, Mardan, Amid, Hesnedikifa, and many other nearby places, while according to Leonard Abel, writing in 1587, Yohanan Sulaka's support came primarily from the towns of Amid and Siirt and the neighboring country districts. Sulaka is said to have consecrated 5 metropolitans and bishops during his brief patriarchate. They were almost certainly the metropolitans Elias Mar and Abdasho Maran, consecrated by Sulaka for Amid and Gazata respectively in 1554. Sulaka's brother Joseph, consecrated for Siirt but soon afterwards sent to India, and the metropolitans Gabriel of Hesnedikifa and Nanasho of Mardan. The hierarchy of Abdasho IV Maran. According to Leonard Abel, Abdasho IV Maran created many priests, bishops and archbishops, and many towns of Nestorian Chaldeans previously loyal to his rival placed themselves under his authority. Abel may have gained this impression from a notorious letter which accompanied a Catholic profession of faith sent by Abdasho to Pope Pius IV in 1562. This letter, which survives in 3 slightly different Latin translations of a lost Syriac original, purports to contain a list of 38 metropolitans and bishops who recognized his authority. Abdasho, son of Yohanan of the house of Mari of the city of Gazata on the Tigris River, was once a monk of the monastery of St. Anthony and of the brothers Ma'ar and Ma Yohanan, but am now, thanks to God and to the Apostolic See, Primate Patriarch of the eastern city of Mosul in Athor, under whose jurisdiction are many metropolitans and bishops. These include the metropolis of Erbil, and the dioceses of Sarava and Hankava, the metropolis of Chepchen, and the dioceses of Karamlis and Achuj, the metropolis of Nasibin, and the dioceses of Magazin, Talaskani and Mardan, the metropolis of Siirt, and the diocese of Asan, the metropolis of Elchison, and the dioceses of Zu and Mashiara, the metropolis of Gurgel and the diocese of Eski, and the metropolis of Abad and the dioceses of Kiaruchia, Hain and Tanna. All these regions are under Turkish rule. Also the metropolis of Ormi Superior, and the dioceses of Ultizemi and Chachia, the metropolis of Ormi Inferior, and the dioceses of Dotra, Saldos and of Schanuk, the metropolis of Esbergen and the dioceses of Nar and Gienum, the metropolis of Salmus, and the dioceses of Bama, Siabithan and Vasthan. All these regions are subject to the Emperor of the Persians. Furthermore, in India, subject to the Portuguese, are the metropolitan dioceses of Kochi, Cranganore, and Goa, and the diocese of Calicut, which also includes the Coromandel region, still in the hands of heathen natives. The status of this letter has long been recognized as problematical, as the Fourth Catholic Patriarch Shimon Ixdeno had only 14 bishops in 1580, and it is unlikely that Abdasho had a far larger hierarchy several years earlier. The locations of the 14 metropolitan sees listed have a certain plausibility, but several of the suffragan dioceses were little more than villages. None of them, as far as is known, had previously been the seat of a bishop. and the bishops they supposedly had in 1562 are not mentioned in any other source. It is possible that Abdasho merely claimed to have 14 dioceses, whose metropolitans or bishops were responsible for the various localities listed under each metropolis, and that the translator misunderstood his meaning. Alternatively, he may have deliberately exaggerated the size of his hierarchy to impress the Vatican. In either case, while perhaps confirming the existence of East Syrian communities in certain districts and villages at this period and indicating the areas where Abdasho claimed support, the letter cannot be trusted as evidence for the number of bishops in his hierarchy. As a guide to Abdasho's support, the letter must be treated with caution. His claim to the western districts was perfectly reasonable, and he certainly had 2 metropolitans in India. His claim to the Erbil, Urmi and Salmas districts may also have been justified, in view of the support for Sulaka from the bishops. Alkosh, however, was the stronghold of his rival Shemon VII Nisho Yahb, who also controlled Telkepe and Karamlish. Abdasho perhaps felt obliged, as Patriarch of Mosul, to assert a claim to the Mosul district, and may have had a bishop nominally responsible for the villages of the Mosul plain. Several metropolitans and bishops mentioned in other sources can be plausibly assigned to Abdasho's hierarchy, and it is interesting to notice that their dioceses match many of the metropolitan dioceses listed by Abdasho in 1562. Sulaka's brother Joseph, metropolitan of Sirte, responsible also for India from 1555, Elias Mar, metropolitan of Ahmed from 1554 to 1582, Abraham, metropolitan of Angamali in India, Nanisho, metropolitan of Nisibis and Mardan, the future Patriarch Shemon VIII Yarbolaha, metropolitan of Gazata, Yohanan of Atel and Botan, martyred in 1572, the future Patriarch Shemon IX Dena, metropolitan of Salmas, Sirte and Jilu, and Gabriel, bishop of Hesnadikifa. The hierarchy of Shemon VII Isulyab, the Nestorian Patriarch Shemon VII Nisho Yahb, who continued to reside in the monastery of Rabban Hormizd, the traditional patriarchal seat, responded to Sulaka's challenge by consecrating 2 metropolitans, Isho Yahb for Nisibis, nominally with jurisdiction also over Amid and Mardan, and Joseph for Gazata. Isho Yahb was probably unable to exercise his authority in Amid and Mardan, both of which had Catholic metropolitans, but Joseph seems to have been accepted in Gazata. Shemon's nephew Elia remained metropolitan of Mosul and Natakersia, and the Mosul and Ahmadiyya districts certainly remained loyal to Shemon VII. Several years later his successor Elias VII had a hierarchy of at least 6 bishops. His brother Nanisho, metropolitan of Mosul and Natakersia, Yarbolaha, metropolitan of Bowari, Joseph and Gabriel, bishops of Gazata, Isho Yahb, metropolitan of Nisibis, and Yohanan, metropolitan of Urmi. Mosul was the chief Nestorian citadel, and Leonard Abel remarked in 1587 that although Sulaka and his 3 successors had all been consecrated patriarchs of Mosul, none had been able to wrest the city from the Nestorian rivals. It now became customary in the Mosul Patriarchate for the patriarchs Natakersia to be also metropolitan of Mosul. The hierarchy of Shemon IX Dena, the 4th Catholic Patriarch Shemon IX Dena, under pressure from his Nestorian rival Elias VII, abandoned the western centers of Amid and Mardan, which had supported the union with Rome, and governed his church from the remote monastery of Mar Yohanan in the Salmas district. During his own lifetime he retained the loyalty of the western bishops, and strengthened the hierarchy he had inherited by creating several new dioceses beyond the western districts. His supporters, mentioned in a letter of 1580 to Pope Gregory XIII shortly after his consecration, included not only the western bishops bishops Elia of Amid, Nenasho of Mardan, Joseph of Seth, Johanan of Attel and Joseph of Gazata, but also the metropolitans Joseph of Salmus, Sargasses of Jilu, Nenasho of Shemsdan, Abdasho of Comma, 3 men listed merely as metropolitans, and the bishop Johanan of Chelhaka, was probably the monastery of Mar Abdasho near the village of Kamain in the Amadiyu district, while Chelhaka may be a deformation of Slok, the Syriac name for Kirkuk. The hierarchies of Eliaate and Shemon X. The allegiance of several districts shifted dramatically on the accession of the traditionalist Patriarch Shemon X in 1600, who divided his residence between Salmus and Quds Harnes. Shemon's return to the old faith was welcomed in some districts, enabling him to consecrate bishops for the Attel and Bowari districts, previously dependent on the Mosul patriarchs. On the other hand, the western bishops transferred the loyalty to the Mosul patriarch Eliaate, mainly because he was felt to be more enthusiastic for the union with Rome than his rival, but perhaps also because they did not wish to be governed by a patriarch unable or unwilling to leave the remote Salmus district. These shifts gave the Mosul Patriarchate control of a wide swathe of lowland territory stretching from Amid to Erbil, including the important towns of Amid, Sirte, Gazata, Ahmadiyya, Mosul and Alkosh, while Shemon X was left with the mountain districts of Botan, Bowari and Hakkari, and the Urmi district. The hierarchies of the 2 patriarchs were given in the report of 1610. In 1610 Eliaate had 6 metropolitans and 9 bishops. This was a considerably larger hierarchy than his predecessors possessed, but all the metropolitans and several of the bishops are attested elsewhere, and there is no need to doubt its genuineness. Some of the dioceses are not mentioned again, and at least one bishop, Hisho Yhb of Sirte, was the nephew and Natakursia of a metropolitan, for whom an ad hoc diocese had to be created. Shemon X had only 5 metropolitans and 3 bishops. Other sources mention several other bishops at this period. Although the 2 reports largely overlap, the report of 1607 mentions several bishops omitted from the report of 1610, including the metropolitans Blan and Imech of Sinjar, Shemon of Erbil, Dena of Lewin, Yarbolaha of Van and Shemon of Albak, and the bishops Joseph of Narawan, Johanan of Vors, Yarbolaha of Bowari and Abraham of Tergawa. The report did not mention their allegiances, but Yarbolaha of Bowari is known to have been dependent on Eliaate, and it is likely that the metropolitans of Sinjar and Erbil were also among his hierarchy. The metropolitans Nenasho of Van and Abraham of the Persian district of Vedanforis, probably the bishop of Tergawa mentioned in 1607, were present at Elia Vii's synod of Amid in 1616. Allegiance of East Syrian monasteries. The reports of 1607 and 1610 also mentioned that the Church of the East used to have more than 100 monasteries, and listed more than 40 separate buildings still in use at the beginning of the 17th century, most of which can be readily identified. The term monastery seems to have been used by the Vatican scribes to translate the Syriac word umra, which could also mean a large church, and at least 11 of these monasteries were merely churches. Others, however, were genuine monasteries, and manuscript colophons confirm that many of them did indeed have monks at this period. The genuine monasteries in the 2 lists, all of which had long and proud histories, were all loyal to Eliaate at this period. The colophons of the surviving manuscripts confirm that monasticism was practiced to a significant extent in the Mosul Patriarchate up to the middle of the 18th century, and that it hardly existed in the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate. About 30 Nestorian monks are known from the monasteries of the Mosul Patriarchate between 1552 and 1743, and about 150 Catholic monks in the Chaldean monasteries after 1808. Of the many scribes known from the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate, only one, the 19th-century solitary Rabban Yonan, described himself as a monk. The possession of these important monasteries gave the Mosul Patriarchate access to the talents of illiterate and educated elite, and the treasures of East Syrian literature preserved in the libraries gave an impetus to the scribal profession and probably encouraged the growth of the great scribal families of Al-Kosh. There were, of course, literate scribes and priests and old manuscripts to be found in the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate, but far fewer. The existence of an educated elite of scribes and monks, coupled with the descent of its patriarchs from the old patriarchal family, gave the Mosul Patriarchs a prestige which its Quds-Khanis rivals could never hope to match. The hierarchies of Elia ix Sheman and Elia x Yohanan Morogan. Elia ix did not consecrate bishops for the historic dioceses of Erbil, Nisibis, and Hasnedikifa, probably because their East Syrian communities were no longer large enough to need a bishop, and during his reign the Mosul Patriarchate consisted of 6 metropolitan dioceses: Amid, Mardan, Gazata, Sirte, Mosul and Salmus. Although he corresponded cordially with the Vatican, he was not prepared to abandon the traditional Nestorian Christological formula. As Shemon X had similar reservations, the Catholic communities in the Church of the East were left without Catholic bishops for several decades. The hierarchies of Sheman Shi and Sheman XII. The extent of the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate in the middle of the 17th century is known from a letter of the 29th of June 1653 from the Patriarch Shemon Shi to Pope Innocent X. Many indeed are the Chaldean Christians under Mar Shemon in the following regions: Julma, Baroga, Galu, Baz, Dasan, Takuma, Jatira, Valta, Talig, Batnura, Luin, Nudis, Sam, Albig, Hasif, Van, Vaskin, An, Suptan, Targa, Ermi, Ansel, Saldus, Asnok, Margard, Amid and Gulnka. In these regions are 40,000 families, all children of the cell of Mar Shemon. As expected, most of the localities listed are in the Hakri and Ermi districts, but Amid and Van are interesting inclusions. Both districts were dependent on the Patriarch Elia VIII earlier in the century, but the dependence around the middle of the 17th century on the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate, probably because of Shemon's Catholic sympathies, is confirmed by several colophons. With these 2 exceptions, the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate covered roughly the same area in 1653 as it had in 1610. The figure of 40,000 families seems far too high. Dioceses of the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate, 1700 to 1830. A number of bishops of the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate are mentioned in the colophons to manuscripts, and the names of the sees foreshadow the organization described by Western observers in the middle of the 19th century. There are frequent references throughout the 18th century to metropolitans named Nanisho, who sat at the village of Marisho in the Shemsdan district, and whose jurisdiction covered both the Shemsdan and Turgawad districts. Colophons also refer to bishops of Bowari named Isho Yhb, a bishop of Gawa in 1743 named Sliba, and a bishop of Jilu in 1756 named Sargus. Khidr of Mosul mentioned a number of bishops from the Ermi district in 1734, also with names which are paralleled in the 19th century: Gabriel, Yohanan, Abdasho, Joseph, Abraham and Ishaya. Dioceses of the Quds-Khanis Patriarchate, 1830 to 1913. Reports made in the 1830s and 1840s by a number of English and American observers mention at least 14 dioceses in the Quds-Hanis Patriarchate, besides a large diocese in central Kurdistan under the direct control of the Patriarch and the Diocese of Shemsdan, under the Mutran Anasho. There were 3 traditional dioceses in Turkey, Bowari, Gawa and Jalu, whose bishops sat in the villages of Dior, Gagran and Mathadmarza respectively. In the 1840s there was also a short-lived Nestorian diocese of Zabar and the Mesuri, in the Aqra district, whose metropolitan, Mar Abraham, sat in the village of Nerim. This diocese is not mentioned again, and seems to have lapsed after the creation of the Chaldean diocese of Aqra. There was also a Nestorian diocese for the Gazata district, whose metropolitan, Mar Joseph, sat in the monastery of Isaac of Nineveh near Shag before his death in 1846, and in 1850 there were 2 other Nestorian bishops in the Atel district, Mar Shemon and Mar Thomas. According to Badger, the Mutran Anasho had 3 suffragan bishops, whose dioceses include the districts of Tergawa, Margawa, Samava, Bradnostai, and Marmadaya. One of these suffragans appears to have been Mar Abraham, who sat at the village of Armutagaj in the Urmia plain and was responsible for a number of villages in the Tergawa district until his death in 1833. Another suffragan bishop, who acted as the Mutran's deputy, sat at Tiz in Komaru. There were also 4 dioceses in the Urmia district of Persia, whose bishops sat at Gawilan and Ada in the Anzal district, and Ardashir and Gugtapa in the Barandaz district respectively, while the dioceses of Mar Yohanan and Mar Gabriel each contained numerous villages, and appear to have been traditional. The other 2 bishops were responsible only for the large villages where they sat, and the dioceses may have been created ad personam. In the second half of the 19th century the Nestorian episcopate continued to develop. In the Urmia district the dioceses of Ada and Gugtapa seem to have lapsed on the death of their incumbents. The 2 principal dioceses, Anzal and Ardashir, continued, and a new diocese was established for the large Anzal village of Supergan, whose bishop, Mar Yonan, joined the Russian Orthodox Church in 1896. The Suldaz district was detached from the Diocese of Ardashir and given its own bishop. Other bishops are mentioned in other sources. In the Botan district a Nestorian bishop sat at Ikra, a village not far from Zakko, and another in the monastery of Makariakos in the village of Elan. In 1891 an unnamed Nestorian bishop is also recorded at Soget in the Arzun district. A Nestorian bishop is also said to have been living in the Bowari village of Aqri.